Netflix was created in 1997, just 4 years after the death of Pablo Emilio Escobar Gaviria. And since its inception, Netflix has had its fair share of fame, hits, and controversies. While the same can be said of Escobar, who sometimes in a single act attracted fame, hits, and controversy all at once. It's no surprise then that when the two collided with the release of Narcos in 2015, fame, hits, and controversy followed naturally. Netflix has been praised for the thorough attitude in which it carried out research and the artistic writing and directing of Brazilian filmmaker José Padilha, which lent rich dramatic effect to the story. However, in a story as political as this, there can be no such thing as perfect. And sometimes the devil might actually be in the details, messing with it. Now, hiding might be a strong word, but this video seeks to expose other aspects of the story that you didn't know. Aspects like the behind the scenes, the over-dramatized truths, the cartels and the surviving Escobar's side of the story, and more. If you haven't seen the show, this video is full of spoilers beyond the spoilers. These are 10 things Netflix is hiding about Don Pablo Escobar, Medellin cartel leader, the first narco-terrorist, and the richest criminal of all time. Number 10. Narcos original plan. The story goes that Netflix had originally planned for this story to be a full-length feature film, not a TV show. However, when they began digging up evidence and research on the King of Coke, they were certain that a single movie wouldn't cut it. They uncovered several stories about the origins of his wealth, starting from the man named Cockroach, and his life before smuggling, which involved stealing gravestones. All these, coupled with the information of personal experiences that DEA agents Steve Murphy and Javier Peña brought to the table, showed the producers that they knew nothing about Escobar. Thus, Narcos was born. Writing for Vox, Bernardo Aparicio Garcia, who grew up in Escobar-run Colombia, appreciates the thoroughness of the show extensively. Among others, he cited the correct depiction of ethnic diversity and tinier details like miniature facades of colonial village houses hanging on the walls of Pablo's mother's home. Number 9. Escobar's recordings. One reason why the show was so detailed was because of these recordings. Pablo Escobar was a big believer in keeping records of events, and this included videoing events in his haciendas as they occurred. With this, they were able to create a pretty fair construct of the type of conversations, fashion, and activities in the daily life of Escobar and the people around him. In the movie, however, Escobar is mostly sitting around, brooding and looking into space while thinking of how to make the next big move in his wars with his own government. The truth is a bit different, as Escobar contributed significantly to the production of the show. In fact, it's clear that the Medellin cartel was a fan of media, as some of his recordings are inserted in the show, displaying the activities within his haciendas. On top of that, he was someone willing to buy or kidnap news reporters to tell his story. One thing's for sure, Pablo would have loved Twitter. Number 8. Family opinion. Of course, you had to know this was coming. And it's quite important too, because you have to wonder, how much of the story and how much of Pablo's interaction with his family was accurate? And how did the Escobars feel about it? To answer your question, Pablo's brother was infuriated with the show. And if you watched the show, you're probably now wondering, where was Escobar's brother all the while in the show? Roberto Escobar was not only Pablo's brother, he was also the cartel's accountant up until he was arrested when Pablo died. So believe me when I tell you, Roberto was not happy when the show depicted another accountant called Blackbeard being arrested and then snitching against the cartel to officials. In response, he requested compensation of $1 billion from the streaming giant for depicting his and his brother's image without any consultation from him or other family members. This was just the first season, so he also offered to look through the second season for inaccuracies before it aired. We're not sure that went his way. Meanwhile, other family members have also contested the portrayal of Pablo in the Palace of Justice siege, as well as the manner of his death, but we'll get to that soon. Number 7. Pablo Escobar's gruesomeness. Watching the show, you already kind of get the idea that Pablo Escobar was one of the most terrifying men to walk the earth. Speaking in Lithuania for log-in conferences, Agent Steve Murphy explains how, before Escobar, law enforcement was not familiar with narco-terrorism. Narco-terrorism involves the use of violence to influence government policies against narcotic laws. According to Murphy, Pablo Escobar was the first narco-terrorist. And to be fair, his terrorist activities are well documented in the show. What's also depicted is the fact that Escobar found it quite easy to order the killing of others. However, his personal dealings with people seem to be a bit benign, never resulting in anything deadly. Well, except the undeniable instances, like the killings of Moncada and Galeano. Other than that, in his personal space, Pablo is mostly shown as a troubled man with a romantic relationship with his wife and kids. In reality, Don Pablo was a drug lord through and through. Based on first-hand accounts from informants, Pablo would drill into his enemies' kneecaps if he felt like it. Another unspoken fact is his treatment of mules. In the movie, Pablo used human mules, and he always paid them. In reality, Pablo sewed cocaine into pets that were going to Miami. Also, mules were sometimes killed to avoid spending a cash. This from the 7th richest man in the world at the time. One time, an informant for agents Murphy and Peña was a waiter at one of Pablo's parties. The informant recounts that another waiter was caught pilfering silverware. Pablo was told of this, and he decided to duct tape the person's hands and throw them into the pool, created by the Paisa Robin Hood, and ended up drowning as entertainment for the guests present at the party. Another instance that we know of is the fact that Escobar killed every single architect who built any of his hundreds of houses. These architects, all Italian, were killed because Escobar didn't want anyone knowing the secrets of each estate. Even with the killings of childhood friends Moncada and Galeano, it was said that Escobar sent the fingers of the men to their family members. All these make you wonder the true extent of his cruelty not portrayed in Narcos. According to Bernardo Aparicio Garcia, the show largely glosses over his gratuitous cruelty. Number 6. M19's true nature. This is the aspect of Narcos that most experts will have disagreements with. M19 was one of the largest guerrilla groups in Colombia. Their ideologies included left-wing nationalism, Bolivarianism, revolutionary socialism, and Foucault theory, inspired by Marxist revolutionary Che Guevara. In the show, M19 is portrayed as a bunch of naive idealists who didn't know the first thing about guerrilla warfare, and was led by an ex-college professor who also didn't know anything about guerrilla warfare. That, my friends, is a dramatic misrepresentation of the facts. M19 had one of the most feared presences in Colombia. Bernardo Aparicio Garcia details how his aunt had barely escaped the Palace of Justice attack. He sums up the story by saying, "It was not only my family in Cali who came close to dying at their hands. They were truly powerful, and they knew how to strike fear." Also, Ivan Marino Ospina, or Ivan the Terrible, was an experienced guerrilla leader as opposed to his depiction as Ivan Torres in the show. Before becoming leader of M19, Ivan Marina Ospina had already fought in Venezuela, gotten arrested, and tortured to the point of almost committing suicide, only to escape 6 months later while disguising as an army major. He was called Ivan el Terrible because he always did things the less diplomatic way, and so he was grossly depicted in the show. It is thought unlikely that Ivan was killed by Pablo, and some even say that he may not have gifted Escobar the famous sword of Bolivar. Number 5. Pablo's relationship with his family. Seeing as the family of the man was not consulted, despite being an integral part of the movie, it's only natural that their interactions with Pablo were imaginative. And that's a dangerous way to tell a story, especially if you already have preconceived notions. Perhaps no other relationship was more misconstrued than Pablo Escobar's relationship with his son, Juan Pablo, now known as Sebastián Marroquín. Sebastián is now free from the drug trade business, and he often talks about his experiences as the son of the biggest drug trafficker in several interviews. In these interviews, he explains how he remembered that his father loved him very much, while also balancing the picture with the effects of his violent activities, once saying,
"Well, I learned so much about violence that I became a man of peace, you know."
Sebastián says that his father taught him about all the drugs, saying that marijuana was Pablo's favorite. He should consult him if he ever decided to try any drug. Perhaps this education helped, or it was the memory of a relative who had suffered from the effects of drug abuse. But Sebastián has never felt the pressure to take drugs. One crucial component of Sebastián's interview is the fact that he recounts he and his mom begging Don Pablo to stop his incursions on Colombia, most notably after the bombing that left his sister Manuela forever deaf in one ear. Their pleas, of course, fell on deaf ears, and Juan Pablo says that this was also a part of his father's nature of being a bad loser. He cited examples where he would cheat even his kids when they played games like Monopoly, simply because he wanted to win. Juan Pablo is portrayed as being very young and naive in the show, even when Pablo calls him minutes before his death, but in real life, Juan Pablo was already 16 by the time his father died, and he has a radically different account of Don Pablo's death than what is in the show, and we'll get there soon. Number 4. Secrets of La Catedral. In the show, Escobar's 5-star prison is revealed as being luxurious with a lot of the drug lord's personal items, but it doesn't reveal everything. Remember the recordings we talked about earlier? Well, there was even more Escobar content hidden in La Catedral. In the movie, Escobar leaves behind a large book with pictures in it. However, in Agent Murphy and Peña's book, Manhunters, How We Took Down Pablo Escobar, they explain, in his adjoining office, we found a film canister in the trash. When we had the film developed, we found pictures of Escobar, which we turned into wanted posters. Peña adds that he had every wanted poster that had ever been issued against him in Colombia, and just about every article that had appeared about him in his files. He also kept threatening notes from his enemies, carefully arranged. Escobar was very neat, and this was evident in the bathrooms of La Catedral, which Peña describes as curiously sparkling, with 3-inch walls. But perhaps the most shocking discoveries were the letters from mothers offering their daughters to Pablo for sex, the lace negligées, and several vibrators and sex toys neatly arranged in a closet. One interesting detail of their book, however, is the fact that Peña slept in Escobar's bed. He recounts that he couldn't find sleep in the bed, tossing and turning all through the night. Number 3. Carlos Leder's influence. Carlos Leder was the son of Klaus Wilhelm Leder, a German who had left his country to Colombia, changed his name to Guillermo Leder, and married a Colombian called Helena Rivas. Carlos would later go to America with his mom after his parents divorced, and eventually, Carlos landed in prison. It was in prison that Carlos met a fellow inmate called George Jung. They would both scheme on how they would revolutionize the cocaine trade and begin transporting drugs to the United States using small aircraft. Therefore, Leder had already begun the business even before he met Pablo Escobar, and was even integral to Escobar becoming as wealthy as he became. Leder himself would become a billionaire and even offered to pay Colombia's external debt twice, one of which was his plan to escape extradition. Unlike on the show, where Leder was just a knucklehead who was told to shut up in meetings and outed himself regularly on national radio. Well, the depiction of his story and fall from grace was far from comprehensive. Number 2. Escobar's suicide. If you know anything about Pablo Escobar's story, suicide must be a very strange word to be associated with his death. But pay close attention and we'll see where this takes us. Pablo Escobar killing himself is a claim made by close family members like his brothers, and most importantly, his son Juan Pablo. You see, Juan Pablo was the last person that El Patron spoke to before he died, and he gives a very convincing argument as to why he believes his dad's death was a suicide. Let's consider his points. The first point, Juan Pablo says that his dad had always told him that the telephone was death. This was because Don Pablo knew full well that the DEA, CIA, Centrospike, and the police officers were monitoring airwaves to triangulate the locations of cartel members. Pablo Escobar always spent very little time on the phone and ordered his son to always stay away from using it. The second point is that Escobar's family had just been rejected from Germany and were then forced to lodge in a Colombian hotel owned by the armed forces. This indicates that Escobar's family was never going to be safe wherever they went, and that the hotel phone lines were surely tapped. Pablo must have known these facts. The third point is the fact that Pablo had taught his son how to commit suicide in case they got captured. Juan Pablo says his father told him that the best way to avoid torture and die quickly was to shoot into the right ear rather than into the mouth. Pablo's brothers confirmed that Pablo had said he would rather kill himself than be killed by the people pursuing him, since it wasn't going to be a pleasant death. Now, let's replay the last moments of Pablo with these facts in mind. A certain Colonel Martinez and his son, Lieutenant Martinez, are using the directional finding gear to try and get any phone signal. At the same time, Pablo Escobar is talking to his own son, Juan Pablo, discussing an interview that Juan Pablo already knows about, on the phone. According to Juan Pablo, his dad called him 7 times, while he tried to cut the call each time. He recounts complaining to his dad that this was dangerous as their phone was likely tapped, and he already knew about the topic being discussed. Juan Pablo understands that his dad is trying to save them from being interrogated by giving up himself. While on the phone, Lieutenant Martinez is holding an antenna from the vehicle and suddenly sights the King of Coke looking back at him. After the police had gathered enough forces, they storm the house, and only then does Pablo drop the call, saying, "Something strange is happening here. I'll call you back." The shooting ensues. His bodyguard Limon is killed, and Pablo is shot on the roof multiple times before his body goes limp. On inspection, a bullet wound is found on Pablo's head. Guess where? That's right, the right ear. Personally, I find it curious that he was found and killed exactly a day after his birthday, almost like someone wanted to have a last supper, a last proper laugh. Number 1. Wagner Moura's pro-drug stance. Wagner played the role of Pablo Escobar in Narcos to perfection. The Brazilian actor was applauded for the role and is so synonymous with Escobar that his pictures show up on a Google search with the drug lord's name. However, they have even more in common. Mura believes that drugs like cocaine should be legalized, and following the experience of living out Escobar, he takes that even more seriously. This is because, in a world where cocaine was legal, Pablo Emilio Escobar Gaviria would have mostly been recognized as a shrewd businessman who became wealthy from nothing and gave back to the poor. Most of his ordered killings began with shutting up officials who wanted to have him locked up or extradited. But what do you think? Should cocaine be legalized? Let us know in the comments below. Did you enjoy this video? If you did, make sure to give it a like. And check out more awesome ones on the Fugitive channel. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Pablo Escobar, aka The Boss, is thought to be the biggest drug trafficker the world has ever seen. It is estimated that at one point, Pablo Escobar was responsible for 80% of all the cocaine being smuggled over the world. At the height of his power, the cocaine lord of Colombia was smuggling 15 tons, or nearly $500 million worth of cocaine into the US every day. Along with his massive drug empire, Pablo Escobar also had a ruthless army full of serial killers. These men killed for Pablo and were loyal to him and no one else. They were called sicarios, and the most famous of these were Popeye, La Cuica, and Blackie. If you're a fan of the hit Netflix series Narcos, you're probably familiar with them already. Well, today we're going to take a look at where these cold-blooded murderers are today, and what's the story behind their obsession with killing people. Number 1. Popeye. Popeye might sound childish and cute, but he's anything but. Juan Jairo Velázquez is the real name of Popeye, given to him due to his protruding jaw, which was later fixed through surgery. The story of Juan Jairo Velázquez starts in Yarumal, Antioquia, Colombia. As surprising as it might seem to you, but it's absolutely true, he used to be a part of the Colombian National Army, and then joined the cadet school of the National Police. A hitman like Juan Jairo Velázquez used to be a part of something that was solely created to protect the public. Let's dig deeper. At first, he was part of the school of NCOs of the Colombian Navy, but then he transferred to the National Police Academy, where he studied for only 1 semester. What did he study there? How to shoot people with enough efficiency that they didn't get to blink twice after the bullet is in them? Wherever he learned his skill, it helped him kill 257 people. Well, that is the number of people that he has willingly confessed about murdering. Who knows about the people whom he has killed but hasn't confessed to? Not only that, but there were also countless kidnappings. Like, kidnapping common citizens and normal people is one thing, but the guy actually kidnapped the candidate for mayorship, Francisco Santos. Not only him, he also kidnapped and murdered Carlos Mauro Hoyos and several other famous politicians in Colombia. So we guess it's safe to say that no matter how rich or influential you are, all it takes is a bullet from Escobar's hitman. If you're horrified after finding out how many people he killed himself, wait until you find out how many killings were arranged by him. 3,000 murders. You heard that right. 3,000 murders were successfully planned by the psychotically genius hitman. Some people might even call him a genius when it comes to planning stuff, even if it was other people's deaths. Definitely not something you should use for inspiration, jokes aside. Where is he right now? 6 feet under, dead, gone, finished. Doesn't breathe the air of this land anymore. While Popeye is a vicious killer, he sure does clean up nice.
¿Cómo aprendió a matar? Me dice a los 12 años. ¿Usted se recuerda cuándo y a quién fue la primera persona que mató?
No, ya el primero que yo maté fue por el 17 años de edad. Fue a un despachador de buses que cuando el primero era conductor de bus y había tumbado la mamá de un amigo nuestro cuando conducía. No esperó que se bajara y no que la señora se iba a bajar y se cayó y la mató. Y la dejó ahí tirada como un perro. Entonces ese fue mi primer asesinato.
In an interview, Juan fondly talks about the first time he killed. He reveals he bagged his first kill at 17. At that young age, Juan was driven by a sense of righteousness as he killed a bus driver who was responsible for the death of a close friend's mother. Later on in the interview, he reminisced about the first time he ran into Pablo. Believe it or not, Juan used to work for Pablo's mistress. When she left the country, Juan went knocking on Pablo's door, looking for a job, and the rest was history. From 1992 to 2014, he served in prison and received a sentence of 30 years. Murder, extortion, terrorism, drug trafficking. He got out in 2014, however, was sent back to prison after he was arrested for extortion once again. Old habits die hard, I guess. The guy was constantly in and out of prison until he finally died of stomach cancer. Interestingly, he also set up a YouTube channel during his time out where he told stories about his time as a vicious, stone-cold killer. According to him, there was an 80% chance that he was going to be killed by a former gang member. I guess even psychotic killers aren't safe from cancer. Moving on to the next hitman of the world's deadliest drug lord. Number 2. La Cuica. La Cuica, or Dandeni Muñoz Mosquera, is considered by many to be the most ruthless and violent out of all of Pablo's killers. Dandeni made his way into the Colombian drug war after being inducted into the Colombian army. However, he was soon discharged due to several minor theft charges. From here, he made his way into Pablo Escobar's cartel, the Medellin cartel. This is when he was given the nickname of La Cuica. La Cuica means fat girl and was given to Dandeni due to his resemblance with his aunt. La Cuica soon rose to the top of the cartel's ranks and became an expert at everything torture. Not only was he one of Pablo's most trusted hitmen, but was also responsible for helping Pablo's army of killers. La Cuica ran a sort of training camp for hitmen. Kids, usually boys but sometimes girls too, were taken from the street and trained to be loyal and expert killers for hire. La Cuica was one of the best at what he did. After murdering his victims, he would carve the words KK on his victims. This was so he could prove that he was in fact the one responsible for the murder. It is rumored that he also skinned his victims alive and sometimes went as far as having them castrated. For La Cuica to take up this lifestyle is quite surviving since he had humble origins. His father, believe it or not, was a policeman, while his mother was an evangelist. He was also related to the church during his early life. The US was after him for quite some time. However, they couldn't do anything since they didn't have the jurisdiction. All this changed after the 1989 bombing of Flight Avianca. You see, Pablo Escobar liked to make a statement. If one person needed to be killed, he would have the entire bus or plane blown up. For the murder of an inside informant, La Cuica was hired to blow up an airplane. The hour-long flight was cut short as the plane blew up in mid-air, killing all 101 passengers on board. This plane had 2 American citizens on board, the death of whom gave the US a reason to come after La Cuica. The crime made La Cuica the first person to be convicted under the 1956 federal law, which criminalized bombing a civilian aircraft. He was also the first person to be tried under the 1986 terrorism statute, which allows the US justice system to put foreign criminals on trial in cases of American death. The US tied La Cuica to 220 murders and the Colombian government to more than 440 murders, although the Colombian government never really pressed formal charges. La Cuica was caught and underwent trial in 1994. Later found guilty, he was sentenced to 10 life sentences and 45 years to be served consecutively. La Cuica is still serving his sentence and is staying at the same prison where the infamous Unabomber is locked up. In an interview from prison, La Cuica surprisingly denied all of his crimes.
Por vida en la cárcel. Yo les dije que por qué si yo no había cometido ningún delito. Y ellos les dijeron que no les importaba, que si yo les ayudaba, ellos traían a mi familia para acá y me daban dinero. Pero que si no les ayudaba me iban a condenar a cadena perpetua o me iban a matar en la silla eléctrica. Y me condenaron a cadena perpetua y buscaron testigos falsos, gente que yo nunca había visto en mi vida, y con esos testimonios me condenaron. Ellos no tienen ninguna pruebas contra mí porque yo no cometí esos crímenes.
Number 3. Nelson Hernandez. Nelson Hernandez also goes by the name Blackie and was born in Colombia. This nickname was given to him because of his African descent. Being a close associate and partner of Pablo, he was one of his most trusted associates. For the longest time, he even worked as a guard and a hitman for the ruthless drug lord. Nelson was widely known for being a bully, but Pablo trusted him enough to let him hang out with him and feel comfortable knowing that they are right where you need to be. Nelson was famous for assassinating and murdering people. He would do what Escobar asked him to without thinking twice, which it turned out wasn't exactly the best approach. Under Escobar's employment, Nelson kidnapped Felix Gallardo, Miguel Angel, and Isabela Batista in Cali and brought them to his boss's estate in Medellin. He helped Pablo out of 1 or 2 sticky situations by attacking Colombian judges and setting fire to all the evidence they had against him. Pablo was really pulling the strings on Nelson, as he had him kill cartel boss Kiko Moncada. Blackie was most important to Escobar when he carried out the 1993 Bogota shipping center bombing, planting 220 pounds of C4 plastic explosives in a car parked in a downtown shopping center. As a result of the bombing, over 20 people were left dead and almost 70 were wounded. Feeling guilty over what he did, Hernandez apologized to God while watching television footage of the aftermath of the attacks. Kids, women, and innocent people were killed, and it was then that Hernandez started sensing that maybe Escobar was going crazy. Scared, he lied about seeing his wife Maria Henao and their daughter Manuela in a hotel window in order to prevent Escobar from forcing him to stay put until he saw them. However, he was arrested by police as he left the payphone. and he was interrogated by the DEA. Rather than be hanged for the bombing, he gave Agent Javier Peña and Agent Steve Murphy details on Juan Diego Diaz, leading to the search block raid on Monte Cassino. As of right now, no one knows where Blackie really is, and it's assumed he's alive and well in the witness protection program. Anyway, that was all for today's video. Do you think the Netflix show told the entire truth about Escobar and his sicarios? Click this video to find out what they were hiding from you. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, hit the notification bell, and let us know what you thought of the video in the comment section.